In addition to creating fields that are unique to an object, there is a way to have information stored in a class that belongs not to an individual object that was created from that class, but to the class as a whole. So imagine that you wanted to have like the my object factory, this class would like to keep track of how many objects it has built during the running of a program. So like when the program is run and then all the way up until when the program is closed, anytime it creates an object of type myObject, it will remember that, and each object will not contain a different set of information. They will all reference the same information. There's a way to do that. Well, one way to do it is you could create like a container over here that's called like an int called like num my objects in program, and we set that equal to 0 at the beginning of our program, and then every time we create a new one, we have to remember to type this line of code. Oops, and we'll put it here, and we'll just say like, okay, we'll increment it if you know what that means. Well, you have to know what that means for this. Or this just means plus plus just means add 1 to the value here. So up here the value is 0, down here it's 1. And then, okay, this whole line of code we have to remember every time we create an object of that type to keep track of it. So we're going to say num my objects in program plus plus there, and then we have to go down. Have we created another one? No, we haven't created another one. So down at the bottom of our program, then we'll print out system.out.println. There are plus num objects in program my object created, or there were, I guess, because the program is over. And it's great, but so this will keep track, and I believe it should print out 2 at the bottom of the program now, or like there were 2 my objects created. Great. So we found an inefficient way to keep track of how many objects were created. There is a much better way, and that is to have the class itself manage that information. So that every time you create one, it's just automatically done for you. Okay, we'll just tick it up. Like we add a tick mark every time an object of that type is created. And so how do we do that? Well, what we do is we head over and we use this word called static, which is weird and just like makes people frustrated when you first learn it. So let's try and demystify it. There's this other type of field. There's this word that can modify fields. So we'll have this be up at the top, static fields or class fields, and this is like an instance, we call it, which means you'll get used to these terms. So like class fields, we say like, okay, we want static num my objects. And this is a container of type int. It just needs to hold a whole number. And we're going to say that equals 0. You don't actually have to give it a value up here. And then, so it's initialized to 0 just automatically, or you can, it doesn't matter. Equals, yeah, we'll just leave it. And then in the constructor, all we do is we say num my objects plus plus right here. And it'll execute that code every time an object is created. But we also have to remember to put it in all the constructors. And so then we need to give that information out to the rest of the world for the runner class to see it. So we're going to create a new method called a static method to reference this information. Static get num my objects. And that will return num my objects. And I haven't typed return, so return, and it needs to be a return type of the variable type that it is. So it's a static method that returns an integer. Static means that you don't actually have to create an object of that type to utilize it, which is confusing at first. But I'll show you how that works over here. So in the object runner class now, instead of having to ask a particular object how many objects of that type have been created, we can just ask the class itself. So now we can say, let's create num objects equals the class my object dot num my objects, or it should be actually get num my objects. So I'm going to change that. So get num my objects. It is that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and then we're going to print that out. System.out.println num objects. So we've caught it, and now this will print out too. So down at the bottom here, it'll say that there have been 2 of those objects created. Why is this useful? Well, it is useful for this exact kind of thing. So it's useful for keeping track of stuff, for keeping track of information that is like necessary to each object individually, but each one doesn't necessarily have a different version of, or doesn't have a different version of. So you need to know it, and it will become obvious when it's useful later on, but it's not as hard as it seems. It just means that instead of this variable belonging to any object that was created from this factory, the factory itself owns it. And so you can ask the factory about it. And why is that really useful? Well, watch this, okay? So because it's annoying to have to keep track of that kind of stuff in a different way. So let's just create a bunch of these objects. And instead of 2, we have to give them all unique names, which is fine. So I'm going to say 3, just for the sake of typing more quickly. 4, and this is 5. Excuse me, it's even annoying to do this, but this you have to do. So, and then 6, and 7, and then I'll just be done. They're all named Fred. It's a bunch of clones. And now if we run the program, this information should reflect that there are actually 7 objects that have been created now. And we know that in this object runner class because we've accessed it using this getMyNumObjects method. And each object does not have its own version of this variable. So each object will have a variable called getNumMyObjects, or have access to it. And this one variable will contain the total number of objects that have been created from that class. So this is a hard concept for kids at first when you see it, but it's really pretty simple once you kind of wrap your mind around it, like many things, I suppose, in computer science. All right, that's way too much about static.